So the next question is, what rig am I going to use? What sail am I going to use? Well, it's right there. Isn't that a great idea? But there's a couple of criteria to meet to make that sail work. Well, this is an unstayed mast, has really no support on it. So I didn't want to add supports to it to make it a bit harder for rigging. This boat actually fits in the back of my van perfectly. I got a Dodge Ram 3500, slides right in the back doors, so I don't want to spend the time trying to rig it, so I chose to do unstayed. There are a couple of rigs that work well with unstayed. I could have made a sleeve that fits over the mast. That's what they originally came with. Um, could have done a lug rig, or a few other ideas, but I chose to go with a sprit rig. I've made a crude drawing here to show you exactly what a sprit rig is. Exactly, it's perfect, isn't it? So you can see the boat there, you can see the mast, and that I used a Sharpie to outline this. The mast is in black going up and down, and there's that spar that runs across. It's going to be the sprit. The sail itself, it's kind of hard to see because I use pencil, is looks almost like a gaff rig. It's got a peak, a head, tack, and a clue. So that's the sail I've chosen to use. So the next thing is, how did I design the sail? Well, I have my mast here, measured my overall height, what I wanted, and my overall length from the step to where I'm gonna have the traveler, which is a line that runs across the back. I had to use some math to figure this out. I had to remember trigonometry to figure out what my angles were. So I found that the overall height, if it'll focus, is 72 inches. The overall length was 75 inches. Once I found that out, I decided to see what the area was from a sail that I would have purchased from somewhere. And that was 45 square feet, converted to inches, 6,480 square inches. So I knew that was approximately my goal. So once I found that, I decided to use some trig, make a couple triangles out of it and figure it out. I just decided at random that length here was going to be 15 inches. Gave me a square that I could easily measure the area of, right there. And I decided to work with this triangle. So I drew out that triangle. I knew what two sides were. I knew what this leg was and that leg was. So I used tangent to figure out what the angles were. So once I got those angles, I could figure out what the area of that triangle was. The next section was the top, which I again divided into two triangles, and I knew the overall length was. I made some other choices here. I used a few other random numbers here to see what this height was. Ended up with 5 inches with a height of 23 inches. And this one I used some inverse tangents and sines, cosines to figure out what the angles were. I knew what this angle was because in the overall sail, I ended up with two parallel lines with a line intersecting them, so I knew that this angle and that angle were going to be identical. So that's how I realized what these angles were. They were exactly the same triangle as below. So I played with some numbers to figure out what the overall size was. Once I figured that out, I knew what this side was, and I used some inverse equations to figure out what the other angles were. Of course, I ran them a couple times to make sure everything matched up, which gave me my overall sail and my dimensions I needed for it and the angles I needed to cut. I was happy when I cut the sail out. My angles lined up, my measurements lined up, and my total area was just over the goal. So that should be plenty of sail for this small boat. That's overall in 2 dimensions. Now, the other dimension would be the belly of the sail. I did not cut pieces and sew it from scratch. I just used an old sail which had a lot of belly in it. So I'm hoping that some of that belly will be retained in this sail once I actually mount it. Now, I don't know what that will be yet, what that will look like. That's going to be a bit of an experiment. See, one other thing I did is I used a foot of the old sail to be the luff there. So there's a bolt rope that runs through the top with a couple of the original grommets in it, and there's a seam there. The seam runs vertically instead of horizontally. That's an intentional choice because from what I've read on this rig, what tensions the sail isn't really the halyard in this case, it'd be the sprit that runs that way. So the tension is going to be brought across the sail, which is why I chose the seam to come vertically so it's pulling across the seam and not along the seam. So that's a choice I made. We'll see how that works out and how the sail performs once I get it on the boat. The next steps are to add an attachment point at the clew at the head and one at the peak, I'm sorry, and another one here at the head to actually attach it. And probably a few more in the luff, because right now there's only 4 there. Probably double that up. I need to figure out how I'm going to mount that. I know I'm just going to lace it around the mast. Just have to figure out how to terminate it, and if that's going to work with how I've decided to rig that sail onto the mast. I'll go ahead and put those pieces in, and then I'll see if I can bend it on the mast and see how it looks.